Welcome in. It is Big Ten today. Great to have you with us on this last day of summer. Dave Revson, Anthony Herron.
It is, isn't it?
It is the last day of summer. Well, we head into a weekend of big showdowns in the Big Ten. That's a good game.
We are getting set. So we're in the thick of the football season.
Yes.
What I gather from you referencing it is the end of summer. Weather's starting to turn. We've seen that happening. But on the football field, man, action's picking up.
Yeah, it should be really good. I mean, Pat, this is Pat Forty joins us as well from Louisville. This is an exciting weekend of games. Really going to get a sense for where some teams fall here in the Big Ten.
Yep, a couple teams that really haven't played anybody yet. Now they get a challenge, and we'll see if anybody in the league from the West Division can hang with the teams from the East. A couple of good cross-divisional matchups in there.
Now, we've had 3 conference games so far. We will have 4 this weekend alone. That is our big story as we look at some of those games that Pat was referencing. The headliner is in Columbus. Remember, not only is this a cross-divisional game, these are the 2 divisional favorites in the unofficial preseason media poll, Wisconsin and Ohio State. Minnesota, maybe the West favorite now. They head to East Lansing, another East versus West game, one you can see on the Big Ten Network. Maryland and Michigan, Iowa and Rutgers, the other 2 matchups. But let's start, Anthony, with Wisconsin and Ohio State. What do you see as the recipe for the Badgers to have a shot here?
I believe we started to see some of those ingredients last week. Now, it was only against New Mexico State, but for Wisconsin to have a confident Graham Mertz throwing the football the way that Graham Mertz began to throw it last week, that's huge for the Badgers because you can go out against most of your opponents if you're Wisconsin, push them around and have Braylon Allen doing his thing, Ches Malusi and Isaac Guerrero and everyone else. But Wisconsin's defense hasn't been yet what we've seen in the past from the Badgers defense. They're growing, but there's so much talent that was lost from last year. So what do you got to do if you're going to face the Buckeyes and you're anticipating you're not just going to be able to shut down that Ohio State offense? You need versatility. You can't just bring the earth. Got to bring the wind and the fire if you're the Badgers, and that's where Graham Mertz comes into this thing, man. Whether you're talking Chimere Dike, whether you're talking Clay Cundiff, there are playmakers on the outside, and I just loved how decisive he was and accurate he was throwing the football last week. Personally, I feel like it was the best I've seen Graham Mertz throw the football since that Heisman caliber performance in his very first start a couple of seasons back that set the bar so high. He threw the ball with vigor and velocity. If he can do it in that manner on the road in Columbus, man, Wisconsin's got a legit shot.
Agreed. He's second in the Big Ten in passing efficiency. He was 9th a year ago, so definitely has made a huge jump here, Pat. But this will be a serious test. It'll be a serious test really on both sides of the ball here for the Badgers.
It sure will. You know, look, Jim Leonard, we know he's an excellent defensive coach. They are just very solid game in, game out. And their pass defense, while susceptible to maybe giving up some yards, they haven't given up touchdowns. 1 touchdown pass allowed while they have picked off 7 passes. That's a very good stat, but this is a whole different level of competition. Obviously, Ohio State, one of the great passing teams in the country. 12 touchdown passes, 0 interceptions. Between C.J. Stroud and all those receivers, I think this is going to be a major challenge for Wisconsin. See if they can step up, hang with those guys, cover them, tackle them. Wisconsin has only allowed 1 passing play of 40 yards or longer. Ohio State tied for the national lead with 7 of those. And the scary thing is, Jackson Smith and Jigba hadn't even really gotten going yet.
And it really stands out to me as well, Pat, the fact that Ohio State's defense and Jim Knowles, we have yet to see them. That first game in Notre Dame, we really thought on the line of scrimmage, that would be a good challenge for them, and it proved to be. This is a challenge like they haven't seen yet this season, though. So can Jim Knowles and that Ohio State defense, because we know Wisconsin's going to want to set their own tempo for this game. And so with that in mind, then how do they go about doing that? They're going to try to push the Buckeyes around, and for Ohio State, can they withstand the onslaught of beef, of mass that the Badgers are going to throw at them up front on the line of scrimmage? If they can, then you have a better opportunity if you're Ohio State to set your tempo.
Yeah, and I think if you look at what happened last week, giving up 21 points to Toledo, I mean, this has not been a dominant defense so far. Tackles for loss, they put up some really big numbers here, but they're kind of middle of the pack in terms of yards per play allowed in the Big Ten. Now, I think you can make an argument, Pat, that middle of the pack might be good enough with this offense, but I still think to a certain extent the jury is out on Ohio State's defense.
Yeah, I think, retroactively now looking at Notre Dame and just the way they've struggled offensively, that you can't extract too much from Ohio State's defensive performance there and say, oh, they're just light years better than they have been. This is the next step in proving that they are better. And they, obviously, as Anthony alluded to, match up on in the trenches and on the ground. You got to be able to stop them there to start with. And so, yeah, I think we're going to still learn a lot more about Ohio State's defense this Saturday than we had in the first 3 weeks.
Wisconsin already 10 plays of 30 yards or longer so far this year. They had 20 all of last year. So this does feel like a little bit more explosive group. We have seen Ohio State struggle at times last year, giving up the big plays. So that'll be the issue. But, of course, then the other concern is just, does Wisconsin have enough to slow down the Buckeyes? Because we certainly, the known commodity here for sure is Ohio State's offense.
And, you know, because Wisconsin offensively has shown the ability to do a little bit more, to show some more versatility, that's a great sign for the Badgers. But it's a delicate balance for Paul Chryst, for Bobby Ingram in calling the plays, where you don't want to get into some kind of score fest. You know, you don't want to try to go, try to have Graham Mertz sling it at the same rate that C.J. Stroud can sling the football. So when do you try to, open it up a bit more, hit the throttle with your offense just to keep that Buckeye defense off balance? Because it's very unlikely that you're going to completely stymie Ohio State's offense. I mean, that performance from C.J. Stroud the other day, where he's not just throwing it between the white lines, man. He's threading needles even out of bounds so accurately. So that's just difficult to defend. You anticipate Ohio State scoring some points. For Wisconsin, how do you play the game at a preferred tempo while not necessarily just being within the confines of the tackle box?
Buckeyes team leading the nation in yards per play, as they did a year ago. So it does feel like they're kind of in midseason form. Minnesota and Michigan State, this feels like it's a really big game to me for both of these teams. Minnesota, I think you could look at them and say they might be the West favorite right now based on the way they played. However, the strength of schedule has not been great, to say the least. Michigan State kind of trying to prove maybe they are not the team that we saw against Washington, and that was more of a function of having to travel west and kind of all the things that go along with that. But certainly some questions about that pass defense. Feels like both these teams, maybe something to prove here.
Agreed, and I'm not even sure which team I think this is maybe a bigger game for, because it's got big implications for each of them. And when you look at the way Minnesota's performed so far this season, this should be a top 25 squad. Yes, the schedule hasn't been stellar, but they've been just as dominant as the Michigan Wolverines, and we're seeing this return to form for Tanner Morgan that's been outstanding, that many of us maybe hoped for, but you don't know for sure. These things aren't guaranteed, but Kirk Ciarrocca being back in the fold, now he just looks like he's back to his 2019 form. It is a big loss to have no Chris Altman-Bell in the receiver corps, but they are deep there. They're just younger. But, I mean, Dalen Wright had some circus catches. Brevin Spann-Ford is one of the most gifted tight ends in the conference. So there's playmakers still available, and, of course, that ground attack. In that game, though, that Michigan State played, yes, it was on the road, in a hostile environment. The game plan that Washington had was basically, let's send 2 and 3 blockers at Jacoby Windman over and over again and give Michael Penix Jr. just enough time to throw really accurate darts to the receivers. So that Spartan secondary was tested in a way that they hadn't been tested prior to that in this season. I was talking about a balance for Wisconsin, same balance for Minnesota. How do you try to lead with that ground attack, even though Michigan State can hit blocks up front, versus trying to attack that secondary that is showing vulnerabilities again?
And it does seem like they are more multidimensional than they were a year ago in that attack. Again, early returns against bad opposition. I get all of that, but Tanner Morgan looks like a different quarterback.
Floor with people.
No, they have been. I mean, they have absolutely been obliterating people, the yards per game differential, leading the nation to this point, Pat. Again, we understand it isn't a great schedule, but this is what you're supposed to look like against a not great schedule.
Yeah, let's define not great. The worst Power 5 schedule in the country so far, according to the Sagarin ratings. So we'll talk about the second worst in a minute. We'll get to that. But look, I am impressed by the product that Minnesota's put out there. They have looked like a PJ Fleck team, ground and pound, and then make some big plays in the passing game. You do wonder what is the hit in the passing game with Chris Autman-Bell out. He had their biggest receptions the last 2 games. You hate to see him go down. A very talented player. Tanner Morgan right now is second in the nation in yards per attempt at 11.7. He leads the Big Ten in that area. And boy, oh boy, that sounds like trouble for the Michigan State secondary, because we saw Michael Penix light them up in that area. But, yeah, who are the next receivers? Can they step up and get open and have Tanner Morgan hit them for some deep shots. That's going to be, I think, one of the real keys to the game.
It is funny you mentioned the Sagarin ratings. I was up here. We had Urban Meyer here yesterday, and we were talking about strength of schedule. And so I dove in to Sagarin, and as I'm sure you know, Pat, and as you probably know, Anthony, they just consider all of Division I together, right? And so it's FCS, FBS. Pat, Minnesota is 216th in the nation in strength of schedule. I mean, you can only play who's on your schedule, and certainly they did not intend to have this easy a schedule. You schedule Colorado, you think you're going to end up with a pretty good game. Colorado just happens to be dreadful, but that's a crazy number when you consider there's only 131 teams in FBS.
Yeah, it really is, and that's what jumped out to me when I was looking at this. And you're right. I mean, Colorado, you would hope is a top 70 opponent, or at least a top 100 opponent. But right now, I mean, that's an awful program. That's the worst Power 5 program in the country. So that is dragging Minnesota down. That wasn't bad scheduling to schedule Colorado. That's Colorado's fault.
And just a couple of years ago, I mean, Carl Durrell was the Pac-12 Coach of the Year 2 seasons ago. They had the rating Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year during that time as well. So at the time, I mean, it wasn't long ago where this seemed like a great matchup. It was just last year when Minnesota went there and blanked them that everybody said, oh, is Colorado not good? When did that happen? It was like the blink of an eye. They went from being great to being awful.
Yeah, it's really staggering. We could go down that road for a long time, but it really is. I mean, it's jaw-dropping how bad they are.
The Gophers did what you're supposed to do
absolutely.
For that level of competition.
Absolutely. Now we'll see whether they can get a win against Michigan State. Spartans have won 5 straight in this series. Back on Big Ten today, and Maryland's still perfect on the year after rallying to beat SMU. Hoping they get to 4-0 this weekend would be the second straight year they have done so. Formidable foe, though, to say the least, in Michigan. Remember, Maryland has not beaten a ranked Big Ten team during its time in the conference. They are 0-28. So let's begin with the perfect starts for both of these teams. We know Maryland off that undefeated start. Michigan obviously is as well, too, Pat, and just annihilating people along the way. What do you make of each one of these teams at this point?
Wait and see on both counts. I'm pretty sure what we're going to see with Michigan. I mean, I think they're extremely good. But as I alluded to earlier, the second easiest schedule in the country so far is the Wolverines. And they did drop a UCLA game to bring in Hawaii, and that is contributing to your own lack of strength of schedule as opposed to Minnesota and the Colorado situation. Ultimately, it probably doesn't matter because you're going to play in the Big Ten East. You're going to play really good opponents. If you win your games there, you're going to be in the playoff picture. But I still want to see Michigan against a team that can at least line up with them and play with them. And I think Maryland is close to doing that. That's the thing, the wait and see on Maryland. You mentioned that stat. That's a huge stat. Maryland has gotten to the point where they're good enough to beat the teams they should beat and haven't been able to take that next step yet to beat the teams that have been above them in the hierarchy. They've come close a couple of times. Mike Loxley's doing a good job there. They've built that foundation. They've got a really impressive offense. Beating SMU, not a bad win by any stretch. But now you go to the big house, and we'll see if they can stay on the field with the Wolverines.
That has been the question for the last few seasons here for Maryland, where you get off to this strong start, and then can you actually prove yourself on the field against an opponent of this stature? And I had an opportunity this morning on Big Ten Radio. I talked to Corey Dyches, and he seemed just really calm and confident. He basically had the game winner that he caught in the game the other day for Maryland. He said you got to treat every game exactly the same. You have to treat every snap exactly the same. And that level of consistency is what Mike Loxley is trying to infuse into his football team. Now, conversely, for where Michigan's at right now, we've seen them win the Big Ten championship last year. We saw them take down Ohio State last year, and this is a crew with so much talent that returns, especially on offense, from that squad. So you understand their confidence. We'll see, though, because the main piece that wasn't around for that wasn't a big part of that, was their quarterback now, J.J. McCarthy. How will he respond now that you're in the conference play? So that question lingers for Michigan to me only because you don't have Cade McNamara behind center, and not anytime soon. You've got J.J. McCarthy in there now.
Yeah, Cade McNamara injured in that game last week against UConn. So let's dive into the X's and O's a little bit. What do you see in terms of the matchup that stands out to you?
I believe this is an opportunity similar to the opportunity Maryland had last year when they faced Iowa, where you go in after a strong start, and now there is this opportunity to prove yourself against the best competition. And I've said this before, I'll say it again. The Big Ten East is the best and deepest division in college football. So with that in mind, only one loss in the entire division, Maryland may not show themselves as a team who can win the East. They have to take this step, though, where they're competing in games like this in a way that they haven't in recent years. If the Terps can begin to do that, then they'll start to change the minds of pretenders like we'd like to see them be able to do in September. And so if you can do that now, whether it's because Talia Tagovailoa is using that arm and all those weapons he has on the outside, is it the run game with the versatility at running back? I believe it's about the defense. I think on the interior of their defensive front, they've got guys who hit blocks really well. So if you can stymie that Michigan rushing attack, make J.J. McCarthy uncomfortable because now more of the load of the offense is on his shoulders.
I gave up just 2 touchdowns in 6 red zone trips for SMU in that game, and really that was what won them the game. We've got 2 offenses we feel really good about here in this matchup, Pat. Maryland, as you alluded to, has really built a great group, and it seems like Michigan is just hitting on all cylinders right now. What's the key matchup in this one for you?
Yeah, you know what? I think who's better in the red zone defensively? Anthony alluded to that, and Maryland did get some key stops there. Michigan, in the first game of the season when McNamara was a quarterback, stalled out a few times against Colorado State in the red zone, but otherwise they've been 100% scoring touchdowns and 100% scoring in the red zone and 80% scoring touchdowns. Maryland, 11 red zone trips, 9 touchdowns, 2 field goals. So they're getting it done when they get the ball into scoring range too. Which defense can rise up, get some stops there, hold teams to field goals, or maybe even just keep them out of the scoring column altogether? I think that could go a long way towards deciding this one.
Maryland can't beat themselves in this game either. I mean, the penalty yard numbers are staggering. It's incredible what they overcame against SMU, more than 140 yards in penalties. They lead the nation in penalty yards per game, and this has been a recurring theme for Mike Locksley and something he's really hit on. So we'll see whether they can figure out a way to stop these self-inflicted wounds. What about Penn State? They have Central Michigan this week. It's a game you can see here on the Big Ten Network, and what a story they were. I mean, that was probably the most impressive win in the Big Ten this past week. Not that they went down and beat Auburn. I don't think any of us thinks this is a great Auburn team, but to hand Auburn its worst non-conference home loss in 40 years, to dominate in the way that they did. And so I think then the question becomes, do you see them differently now than you did at the beginning of the year in terms of where they fit in the pecking order in the East?
Yes.
Okay. How so?
Well, because when we sat here last week,
what a closed question.
Exactly.
I should have asked it much more broadly. Yeah.
When we sat here last week and we talked about Penn State, I told you I'm wait and see mode on the ground attack.
Yeah.
I have waited. I have seen it. It is spectacular. And it's not just Nicholas Singleton, but obviously he is the most remarkable talent who they have available to them in the backfield. And he's been taking a star turn for the Nittany Lions. If you can do that up front, and as bad a football team as Auburn seems to be top to bottom, where they're best is in their defensive front seven. Where they are definitely best is in the D-line. The dudes with their hands in the dirt for the Auburn Tigers, that's where most of their NFL talent is right now. And Penn State pushed them around. Not just the offensive line. Brenton Strange as a tight end was beasting people on the edge and in pass protection. That was a physical bludgeoning that Penn State was able to perform on the road at Jordan-Hare. If you can do that in that environment, there is no reason to think that that's not now within the DNA of Penn State week in and week out. And that just makes the life of Sean Clifford so much easier. There shouldn't be as much risk now for a guy who's been banged up and played through injury so frequently during his career. And yes, they're more insulated at quarterback, it seems, because we've seen Drew Aller in these environments as well. But when you can run the rock like that, there's just less pressure. So much of the load of the Nittany Lion offense over the years has been on Sean Clifford's arm and legs. That doesn't have to be the case this season. So yes, the answer to your question, I see them differently now.
And it feels like the offensive line is significantly better, and a big part of that. I know Singleton's going to get all the headlines, and justifiably so. He's fabulous, Pat. But the missing link here has been that offensive line. I thought James Franklin was great at media days where he said, I'm not going to promise anything. I'm not going to tell you that we're going to be better, because it feels like I come here every year and say we're going to be better, and we're not. But I think the subtext in that was he clearly believed they were going to be, and it appears they are.
Yeah, don't tell me, show me. And they showed. That was a huge performance, I think, by them in the offensive line. To Anthony's point, Auburn's always got guys on defense, on the defensive front, and they pushed them around to an amazing degree there. And it wasn't just the running backs making moves. It was the running backs having a lot of room to just get loose and go. So that's a great performance by the offensive line there. I'm super impressed by Penn State. They're the only team so far to have 2 true road wins over Power 5 opponents. They showed resilience against Purdue, and they showed dominance against Auburn. And now look at the schedule set up heading towards October 15th against Michigan. You got 2 home games you should win. Then you get an open date, rest up, prep up, while Michigan has to play on October 8th. You're going to have a little bit of preparation advantage there. Right now, I'm buying the Nittany Lions big time.
And then we've talked a lot of offense here, Pat. When it comes down to it, the Penn State defense is what we felt most confident about coming in, but there's a lot of personnel that got lost there last year. But can they rush the quarterback? Chop Robinson and crew? Check. Can they defend the passer? We are in what's kind of a golden era right now in the Nittany Lions secondary. Man, they got guys. Jair Brown can play it well at the safety. Joey Porter Jr., of course, can lock it down on the outside at corner. They are so deep and talented on the back end. So that combination of pass rush, secondary coverage, and Manny Diaz's aggressive style, we're a little bit surprised and pleasantly so by the balance of Penn State's offense that's now emerged. But that Penn State defense, that was already going to be championship caliber, so they've proven that. Now when you add all the things we're discussing with this Penn State offense, that's why, maybe they're a notch, just a step behind the way I perceive Ohio State and Michigan, but they're gaining. There's not another team in the Big Ten that I think has taken as big a leap from week 1 to week 3 as the guys in Happy Valley.
We suspect they're in the discussion now. We will know in October. Pat's talking about that game against Michigan. That starts a huge 3-game stretch. Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio State in successive weeks. So we will know a whole lot about the Nittany Lions when we sit here 5 weeks or so from now. Not to wish the time away. With hockey season just around the corner, the Big Ten preseason hockey coaches poll is out. Minnesota voted the preseason favorite. Notre Dame was selected second, followed by Michigan. All 3 of those teams qualified for last season's NCAA tournament. The Big Ten season opens Friday, October the 7th, Wisconsin at Ohio State. Back to football, and Saturday we have a great triple header of action here on the Big Ten Network. 14th ranked Penn State clashing with Central Michigan. Minnesota and Michigan State. Talk about that game in East Lansing. And in primetime, Purdue hosting Florida Atlantic or Northwestern, and Miami of Ohio. It all starts with Big Ten tailgates Saturday right here on the Big Ten Network. And as always, on the Fox Sports app. Iowa blanked Nevada on Saturday night / Sunday morning. Now just the 5th Hawkeyes team in the last 62 years to allow 10 or fewer points in each of their first 3 games of the season. They are second in the nation in scoring D. None of the previous 4 teams to accomplish this were able to extend the streak to 4. It is not unreasonable, Anthony, to think that they could do that against Rutgers. However, it's also not unreasonable to think that Rutgers could hold them to 10 points or fewer. These are 2 teams that are constructed very similarly.
And I believe with that in mind, the personalities of both head coaches, a lot of coaches like to throw around the term complementary football, but not really commit to it. There are probably no 2 coaches more committed to the idea of complementary football than Kirk Ferentz and Greg Schiano, and that's where this matchup won't always be the most aesthetically pleasing for those watching the game. But I'm very excited about it for a variety of reasons, chief amongst those because of the punters. The punters in this game between Iowa and Rutgers, man, you probably got the 2 best punters in America. So, yes, the defenses, the line of scrimmage, all that is going to be very fun. But when you have a punter like Tory Taylor, you have a punter like Adam Korsak to change the field position within this matchup that will feature so much complementary football, we're going to see chess matches between these coaches that pay close attention to how every phase of the game interconnects and can help lead them to victory, as opposed to just dropping back and throwing it 50 times and counting on some high-flying offense to get it done.
You don't have to sell me on this. I wrote an entire book centered around Australian drop kickers. So, Pat, this game fires me up. I'm not going to lie to you, right? This is the opening kickoff redux. This is Punter Fest, but also a really important game for both of these teams. I mean, for Rutgers, they have not won a conference home game since 2017. it's staggering because they are far better. But just for whatever reason here, it's been 5 years. It's the second longest streak in college football history. They need to get a win here. They feel like this is an opportunity to do it. Meanwhile, Iowa trying to build on the improvements they saw offensively against Nevada.
Yeah, hey, it's 1892 all over again. This is going to be great. I ask you guys this. Can this Iowa team play a normal game? I mean, we have had the most bizarre 3 weeks from them. I mean, whatever that was against South Dakota State, and then there was a lot of intrigue in the slogging against Iowa State, and that went down to the very end. And then we have the Lightning game and people walking in with their dogs after midnight to see the end of that game. And now I don't think this is going to be a normal game either. I mean, the over-under line is 35.5. Anthony Herron hit on the key matchup. It is a punting game. It's field position. It's all about that. I will say, Rutgers, really good rush defense, and so Iowa State's going to have to throw the ball some, and we'll see whether they can do that. But I think the line is low for a good reason. Sit down and watch a lot of punts go high in the sky and far down the field.
In this corner, standing 6'4", 230 pounds, Torrey Taylor. In this corner, standing 6'2", 185, Adam Korsak, the two best punters in America. But I do think Pat's point about the rushing attack for Iowa, especially because they're still banged up at the skill position. You know, Gavin Williams was limping around in his first extended action back out there last week. Keaton Johnson had to leave the lineup again. He seems really iffy from the way it sounds this week. So from a skill position perspective, Iowa getting some reinforcements there. Nico Ragaini, we're learning that his name is actually pronounced a little differently than we've been saying it for years. But having him back, the contested grab for a guy who's still diminutive in stature, that veteran leadership he adds, the comfort that seems to be there, enhanced for Spencer Petras. Just having him and some of his more dependable playmakers back in the lineup, that can end up paying dividends for the Hawkeyes.
We'll see whether they can do it. And again, as Pat mentioned, this is you got to have the pass game going because Iowa's given up, or Rutgers given up 97 rushing yards all year. And they're giving up 1 yard per carry. Like Rutgers, Indiana is still unbeaten. A tough test at Cincinnati, a team that is absolutely dominant at home. Pat, what would it take for the Hoosiers to go and get a win?
You know, they've got a little bit of a formula going. I'm not sure it's, the safest formula to count on Connor Bazelak leading long last-second drives for your team. But you start having success in that area, and I just think it helps the confidence and belief of the whole offensive unit that, hey, when we have to have a drive, we're going to go out and do it. And Bazelak's, found a couple of good connections with his receivers there. He has been erratic for sure, but when they've had to do it, they've gotten it done. Cincinnati, on the other hand, this isn't the same team as last year. We knew that coming in. They lost a ton of players, 9 NFL draft picks, so there is a rebuild going on. But the most surprising stat for me, Cincinnati's a -2 turnover margin. That is not a Luke Fickell statistic. And if they do that again, if there's a minus turnover, Indiana can win this game. I think this is a great opportunity for IU to kind of use this as a springboard forward the way Cincinnati did last year in Bloomington.
And the Hoosiers, their receivers, the depth they have on the outside, combined with the experience of Connor Bazelak, it's still gotten off to slow starts in every game so far this season. I think, to Pat's point, this is an opportunity for Indiana because they're undefeated right now, and you're going to face a Cincinnati squad that lost a lot of NFL talent from the back end last year. They got off to a fast start against Cincinnati last year and couldn't sustain it. They've gotten off to slow starts every game so far this season. If they get that Walt Bell tempo going on the road and just get it rolling earlier with some early points, I don't think they're going to blow Cincinnati off the field, but just to infuse confidence into a crew of guys who just haven't done this together very frequently. And who knows, man? I mean, Chucky Soups, Charles Campbell, over and over again the last couple of years, he's hit big kicks and had big moments for the Hoosiers. So if they can at least just put him in a situation, if it's not touchdowns every time, put some field goals on the board early, I really think the Hoosiers would be in a great spot on the road for the first time this season to get a nice win.
You ought to be ashamed of yourself. Chucky Soups.
Really?
Yeah.
Get an NIL deal.
You can do better than Chucky Soups, right? This is, first of all, great special teams mentions throughout this entire segment here. But this is a better Indiana offense than a year ago. Now, that is a very low bar, Pat. There's no question about it. But over 350 yards each of their first 3 games, that equals their total from a year ago. It does feel like they've gotten something. Bazelak obviously brings them, they were a mash unit at quarterback last year. He brings them some stability. Feels like maybe they've solved the running game a little bit, at least in game 2 they did with Sean Shivers. It's a better offense than a season ago.
It is, and Bazelak has some receivers who can make some plays for him. DJ Matthews, Cam Camper. I mean, they've got some guys to rely on there. And I think the comfort with Walt Bell seems to be growing. And again, you're not facing a defense that was the Cincinnati defense last year. You know, they're not going to be able to just absolutely terrorize the quarterback as much. They're not going to be as good at the corner position. 2 NFL draft picks there, so you might have some matchups you can take advantage of. I think this sets up very well for Indiana. To Ant's point, if they can avoid a slow start, don't get behind early, and let a good crowd at that Nippert Stadium there, an underrated venue, kind of get things rolling against you.
28 straight home wins for Cincinnati at Nippert Stadium. Only Clemson has a longer streak nationally of consecutive home wins. Pretty remarkable what they have done there. It is time for our big stat. And how about Leah Tungavailoa leading the Big Ten in completion percentage, 3rd in the nation, 3 games in it, better than 77%. A Terp QB has not led his league in that category since Scott Milanovic in the ACC nearly 30 years ago. You see 4 Big Ten quarterbacks here over 70% early on, which gets us to our Impact 5. As promised, Anthony counting down his top 5 Big Ten quarterbacks from 5 to 1, as we know, Letterman style, as he likes to do. Where are you starting?
I'm going to start Seacrest style with number 5.
Yeah.
And it's a guy who preseason, I didn't have this individual in my top 5 quarterbacks in the Big Ten, but through 3 games, first 3 true weeks of the regular season, Tanner Morgan has been marvelous. And it was something Gopher fans were hopeful about, combining him with Kirk Shiraka again, and it's been delivering so far. We talked about the level of competition early, Sagarin-wise, maybe they haven't faced the best competition, but in the end, has he performed up to par? Last season, even against a team like Bowling Green, he still struggled. The offense still struggled. That hasn't been the case so far this season. So Tanner Morgan's performance has him right there in the thick of having the Gophers as what I thought preseason would be the Big Ten West favorite, and they look like that right now because of the versatility, a healthy Mohamed Ibrahim, an offensive line that still mashes opponents, sets everything up on the outside for Tanner Morgan to get it to that talent that's available to him, and he's done it really effectively.
He has indeed. He's a winner. He's 30-12 as a starter in his career, which you would take any day of the week. Who's number 4?
Number 4 is a guy another sort of veteran statesman at the quarterback position, and it can be difficult for those quarterbacks who've been around the block for a while to maintain their popularity, and so Sean Clifford. The question was whether or not at a healthy level, could he push this Penn State offense forward kind of by himself because they weren't running the rock? I feel even better about him at this point now that they have that run game established, because part of the reason I was still bullish on Sean Clifford was because so much of the offense was on him for Penn State without a ground attack that went along with him. Now you got a run game with his experience and his mobility and his moxie in key critical moments. We've seen him rise up and have huge performances late for Penn State. He responds so well to adverse conditions. I was talking to his teammate, or actually his roommate even, Mitchell Tinsley, who just transferred in. He was marveling to me this morning about Sean Clifford's just kind of determination and focus that he's seen from him since he joined up with the Nittany Lions. I mean, 4 and maybe rising for Sean Clifford.
First time he has not had to learn a new offense. And we talked a lot about that coming into the year and whether that might positively impact him. And it really feels like it has. Again, also helps to have Nick Singleton to turn around and hand the ball off to, and an improved offensive line. And Tinsley, you mentioned, is a really good player, but really seems like it's coming together for him. Who's number 3?
Aiden O'Connell is a quarterback that his story has been, sort of a roller coaster ride from walk-on to scholarship to in and out of the starting lineup. And he established himself as Purdue's true starter coming into this season. You guys, when you were there on the training camp tour, you saw how well he was throwing the football. There's some things around Aiden O'Connell that are maybe a bit frayed and not performing up to snuff, which is why in games that they've controlled, in games they've outplayed their opponent, we haven't seen Purdue come up and have an undefeated start to the season that their performance could be. But I believe for him, that accuracy, that leadership, that's emerged now that he knows he's the guy, I have no doubt Aiden O'Connell will continue to put up huge numbers. And for him, being solidified as the starter, it really seems like it's made a big difference for him in knowing he's got the confidence not only of his teammates, but of the coaching staff as well.
Well, he certainly put up the numbers. I mean, threw for 424 yards against Syracuse, the most ever for Purdue in a non-conference road game. You think about all the great quarterbacks that they have had through the years. So that tells you how well he's throwing it. Again, some other stuff went wrong, which we will talk about in a bit, that prevented the Boilermakers from winning that one. Who do you have at number 2?
I've got a guy at number 2 who I feel like just hasn't gotten the respect, perhaps the national notoriety that he deserves. I know Mike Locksley agrees with me about Taulia Tagovailoa, and this is an opportunity for him this weekend, similar to the opportunity he had last season when he faced the Iowa Hawkeyes when they came to College Park. I believe, though, Taulia Tagovailoa, because of everything he brings to the table, the pure talents as a passer are immense. The way that he can adjust the arc of the football, turn the trajectory over, the velocity he can put on it, the confidence he has in the Mike Locksley system, and oh, by the way, all those playmakers that are there on the outside for Maryland. And that doesn't guarantee that every game will be easy. It doesn't guarantee that every game will put up a bunch of points and a bunch of passing yards. But he's now had to respond in some critical moments in games also. His mettle has been tested, and he's at a point now where he's beginning to respond. We saw him making plays late alongside his tight end, Corey Dyches. So I believe this is the best version of Taulia Tagovailoa that we've seen.
Making fewer mistakes for sure. Just 2 interceptions so far, and that's the thing that Mike Locksley talked to us about in camp that he worries about are the turnovers. You mentioned the big stage against Iowa last year, so we know he had 5 interceptions in that game. So this is another huge
It's an opportunity
stage
to put that behind them, because we all continue to mention that Iowa game, and we will until we see him perform on a stage like this. And it's not the first stage. It is the first stage, but not the last stage they'll have with this opportunity.
So I feel like we can all guess who's number 1 then.
You're probably thinking C.J. Stroud, and you would be accurate if that is your assumption at this point. You knew it coming into the season. The nation has known it coming into this year. And somehow, some way, this Heisman finalist is playing even better football than we saw C.J. Stroud playing before. I mean, he throws the ball beyond the confines of the playing surface, does so accurately, and also have the playmakers who can make those grabs for him, whether it's Marvin Harrison Jr., while he's on the way out of the bounds, if it's Julian Fleming, who seems like he is out of bounds and some sort of optical illusion brings the football back into the playing surface just enough for Julian Fleming to still be able to corral it. He has this kismet with his receivers and this confidence in himself, this knowledge, this acumen for the Ryan Day offensive system, and him being bolstered, C.J. Stroud, by the Ohio State rushing attack, where they know it doesn't have to be game in and game out, where he just has to sling their way to points and fire their way to touchdowns and victories over and over again. That's the balance that's now being showcased that I've been sort of calling for a couple of years now. That's a part of what I believe is enhancing the all-around performance of C.J. Stroud.
Gets to throw a pick this year, now going up against that really good Wisconsin defense. Pat mentioned earlier, 7 interceptions by 7 different players so far this year. So that will be a challenge. So no Peyton Thorne, no Graham Mertz.
I had Peyton Thorne in there preseason.
No J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah.
Pat Forty, what do you make of this list?
For the vocabulary, getting Kismet in there, outstanding. But I have one addition to the list. Now, this is one of my pet peeves in the media as somebody who makes a lot of lists. Is somebody says, your list has no credibility because you left off player X. Well, who are you taking out to put that player in? All right, I'm going to do that. I'm going to say we're going to put in J.J. McCarthy, and I'm taking out one of the senior citizen quarterbacks. They've all played very well. Tanner Morgan, Sean Clifford, AOC. But I think I'm going to take out Tanner Morgan, my fellow Kentuckian. A lot of respect for him. He's playing very well. But I think J.J. McCarthy, his accuracy is ridiculous at this point. His athleticism is impressive. And I think we're going to see him only put on a bigger show as things go along. I agree he hadn't played much competition yet. But I think J.J. McCarthy will certainly end up being a top 5 Big Ten quarterback before this season's even halfway through.
Your rebuttal, Mr. Herron.
I like to see it, man. Just give me some more tangible evidence beyond the 2 starts. And we're going to have an opportunity to see it this week and beyond, no doubt. It's a Maryland defense that folks aren't paying as much attention to as perhaps they should. Like Maryland's defensive front, they're going to be able to test Michigan, test J.J. McCarthy, and the fact that there's no Cade McNamara for a while. I wonder how that impacts the way that J.J. McCarthy is utilized? Are the coaches in his ear talking about don't run around as much, keep yourself out of harm's way? There is some experience that's transferred in. There's some depth at quarterback. They don't want to test it, though. They really thought they were truly insulated with McNamara and McCarthy. I wonder how his game may adjust with McNamara injured.
I'd say there's some depth at quarterback. They had 7 different players throw a pass last week.
Including Dave Repson?
I would have been the 8th.
Okay.
Yeah, but I was here. I was stuck here.
Yes, you were very busy.
They couldn't get me there. Here's what I want to know. Have you already decided the Impact 5, like what it's going to be every week from now to the end of the season? Is there a big grease board that dictates I'm going to do top 5 inside linebackers on the 3rd week of October, anything like that? Because I'd like to revisit this at some point.
I believe we should. I believe we will. Like I mentioned, Peyton Thorne is one of those guys who I had preseason. Not anymore, though. He's taken a slight step back. I'm waiting to see
I'm with 40.
I'm
with 40.
I'm waiting
if
to see,
JJ isn't one of the top 5 quarterbacks at the end of the year.
Give me a month. Give me a month of pure QB performance, and then you can be in the top 5. There's a lot of these guys with very deep resumes. We may have the oldest crew of quarterbacks in all of college football in the Big Ten Conference, so there's a depth of the resumes there before I just sort of vault JJ ahead of them. He barely has been starting for Michigan. I put Cade McNamara in the top 5 before I put JJ in there right now.
When are the right guards? When do we count down? Because DiNardo will want to participate.
Impact 5 hands. I can get the punters.
Our punters would be a really good list. Yeah.
Hey, man, got the 2 best in America. I don't know if I told you, Torrey Taylor and Adam Korsak are matching up this week.
As we alluded to, football tomorrow on the Big Ten Network. The Fighting Illini scoring off with Chattanooga, presented by Hampton by Hilton tomorrow night, 8:30 Eastern on the Big Ten Network and the Fox Sports app. Anthony Herron will be on the call, I assume, along with Lisa?
Yes, Lisa Byington, Elise Menaker will be on the sideline. Really looking forward to it, man.
We are looking forward to being a part of it as well here in the studio. What intrigues you the most about the Illini to this point?
Because they feel like they should be undefeated, and I don't disagree. When you look at that opening game they had against Indiana, it was a game that they controlled a lot of. We saw the initial look at this enhanced defense that they have there, and the physicality of the back end, the ability for the defensive line to not only rush the quarterback but to hit blocks up front. We are seeing a level of defense from the Illini that I believe goes beyond what we even saw last year as Ryan Walters was sort of starting to build things. And man, I mean, to see Chase Brown in person, leading the nation in rushing still at this point, the best version of him that we've seen as well. So getting to see that in person is really going to be fun.
I am really impressed with this defense. I mean, they're 15th in the nation in scoring defense, Pat, and they have actually played a pretty good schedule to this point. I mean, Wyoming, who they absolutely manhandled, went out and beat a pretty good Air Force team. So this is an impressive Illinois team, and as you said, just an eyelash away, Anthony, from being undefeated. But what intrigues you about the Illini, Pat?
Against Indiana, and that defense is lights out, and we're looking at Illinois in a totally different way. They'd be 3-0. They'd have a road Big Ten win. They would have dominant wins over what might be the best team in the Mountain West and over an ACC opponent. So, I mean, you hate to look back and say what if, but boy, you just get off the field against Indiana at the end of that game, and you're looking at a lot. But even so, like if you're the Illinois coaches, I think you got to be driving to the facility in the morning excited about your team and where you're going. You said the defensive improvement. Just stop fumbling the ball on offense, and things are going to look a lot better.
8 turnovers in 3 games. I mean, that is a problem, no doubt. We alluded to Purdue a little bit earlier. We're going to see them against FAU. They really let one get away against Syracuse, Pat, and that's a tough one to recover from, particularly in combination with the loss to Penn State earlier this year as well. They have to feel like they're in a spot where they could be undefeated as well, and instead 1-2.
Absolutely. I mean, the Penn State loss hurt, but this one, oh my goodness, I'm sure there are some sick feelings in West Lafayette in that locker room of the last couple of days. And here's the thing, the way I look at it with Jeff Brom and his team. He coaches with extreme emotion. His teams, he wants them to play with intensity. It's all energy and emotion there, which is kind of a formula you need when you're a bit of an underdog in the league. But you've got to be able to turn those off at the end of a play. You cannot overly celebrate. You cannot criticize the officials. You can't lose your composure the way they did in the last 51 seconds of that game. They were called for 7 penalties. You can argue a couple of them, especially the pass interference penalty. But, oh, my goodness, you just can't beat yourself that way when you're Purdue. I'm not sure Ohio State, Georgia, and Alabama could play that way and still get away with a win. So you sure can't do it at Purdue.
55 yards in penalties in 51 seconds is a staggering pace.
Is it not a record? It has to be a record. I can't imagine there has been another 51 seconds with that many penalties for that many yards. I'm also confident, though, that Jeff Brown will address it, get it corrected. This team, they always have a rough non-conference slate, and they're going to get better.
All right, we will see again. We've got them in prime time coming up on Saturday. Thanks to Pat. We will see you tomorrow with Jerry joining the show.